hardware, it can be a weakness in the procedure. In fact, I wrote a white paper for the Department of Commerce not that long ago, talking specifically about some of the procedural weaknesses that come into existence as systems are migrated from in-house to being cloud-based. Maybe I'll have a video on that a little bit later. But the point is, the separation of administration between two parts creates procedural weaknesses in the transmission of confidential information between those two parties, especially when we're talking about a public cloud server. So that was an example I talked about in my work with the Commerce Department. But whatever the case is, there can be weaknesses at any level of the information system and information systems management. It doesn't always have to be a technological weakness. It could simply be poorly trained employees. One of the worst situations I've ever seen was a small company that I did some consulting for, where the senior management of the company insisted on having carte blanche administrative access to all the systems, all the servers. And the rationale was, I'm the boss, I should have access to everything. Now, while this rationale may make sense from a human aspect, because this particular user was not necessarily the most tech-savvy person, they created a huge gaping hole. It wasn't until we helped them understand that even administrators shouldn't use administration level access at all times, that we were able to persuade the senior management to kind of let go of having their carte blanche accounts. And we were able to overcome some security weaknesses. But that's a human vulnerability to the entire system, not based on technology, but based on human factors. So when it comes to vulnerabilities, any weakness that presents an opportunity for an attack is what we're talking about. Anything that creates a probability of breach is a vulnerability. So you can talk about technical vulnerabilities in terms of the version of the software. Older versions may have had weaknesses that have later been corrected through service patches. So what server is running on the system? Is the latest patch or software update implemented? Is there unrestricted dial-in access or open Wi-Fi access points? Even little things like ports on a firewall that are not used assigned. Are they open? Do they have access? For instance, if a building was facilitated for wired access all over the place, and there's a port on the wall right there, if I plug my laptop into it, do I have immediate access to the physical network? In other words, is that port on the wall live on a switch or port on the router? This could be a vulnerability because it's an access point, potentially an access point that's not being monitored. What about lax physical security, unenforced password management? All these areas give us vulnerabilities, weaknesses that can be exploited, that can become the basis of an attack. Now, a threat, which is the next term that we're going to focus in on, is when there is a potential for danger to the systems because of a vulnerability. So a vulnerability is a vulnerability because behind it exists a threat. Now, for there to be a threat, there must be an agent that would take advantage of the threat, or a threat agent. So a threat agent poses a threat because of a vulnerability. If you have vulnerabilities in your systems, threats may present a danger to your system. But even if the threat is there, if the threat is so far-fetched that it's improbable because there's no threat agent, then again, the risk is not that great. And we'll talk more about risk in just a second. So an example of a threat agent. A threat agent could be an intruder taking advantage of that open port that we talked about. Or maybe the firewall isn't properly locked down, and there are logical ports, or also called soft ports or TCP ports. We'll talk more about that in the networking section of this. But there's an open, accessible TCP port that's not being filtered by the firewall or the router. An intruder may take advantage of that to gain access to a system, because maybe there's a system that's listening on that port, and through that particular mechanism, maybe access could be gained. For instance, in legacy Windows systems, there would be a NetBIOS service running.